Hi, my name is Tiffany Zhang. I'm the founder and host of Undocumented History, an online YouTube video podcast. In today's episode, episode 7, I will be speaking with Justin Zhu, the co-founder and executive director of Stand with Asian Americans, the largest coalition of Asian American activists. Amidst the spike of Asian hate during the pandemic, many Asian Americans felt the pressure to speak up against the long history of anti-Asian sentiment in America. Asian hate had always existed. It's just that the pandemic deepened it and made Americans more aware of it. One activist who decided to stand up was Justin Zhu. He and a group of other entrepreneurs wrote an open letter that was eventually published in the Wall Street Journal. We are tired of being treated as less than Asian American. We are afraid, we are angry, it read. This letter would ultimately inspire a movement. In this interview, I will be discussing the harmful implications of the model minority myth, how to fight back on Asian American discrimination, and the mental health of the AAPI community. Here is my conversation with him. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Undocumented History, an online video podcast focused on educating others about Asian culture and history while also amplifying Asian voices and stories. I'm Tiffany Zhang, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Justin Zhu, the co-founder and executive director of Stand with Asian Americans, a coalition that is fighting to end Asian discrimination and racism. Mr. Zhu, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything else that you want to add regarding to what you do and who you are?
Thank you for having me, Tiffany. It's so great seeing a young person like yourself, so interested in Asian American history and getting our stories out. So really glad to be here.
Okay, great. So I guess my first question, just to like kind of get the ball rolling, I guess like why did you or how or why did you decide to pivot from the career path of computer science to fighting for the civil rights of Asian Americans? I guess like can you talk a little bit about your journey?
I think for many Asian Americans, we are uh, pushed to pick majors that give us stable incomes, like in engineering, in law, in finance, being a doctor. Um, After my first job as an engineer, I started my own company as the co-founder and CEO, and um, it was really from this path of wanting to explore what I'm destined to do. I don't think all the Asian Americans, so many of us are meant to be all doctors and engineers. I think we need more people in public service. We need folks in the media, in entertainment, in the arts. And so when the Atlanta spa shootings happened in 2021, I felt compelled as an Asian American business leader to speak up on anti-Asian violence and encourage other Asian Americans to speak up as well. And so this is where I got into civil rights. I previously was not part of that, but I felt that hey, if Asian Americans aren't speaking up about anti-Asian discrimination, something needs to be done.
Mhm. I guess like did you find that kind of transition easy or hard, or did you like think that, I don't know, kind of aided you into transitioning?
It was definitely outside of my comfort zone to speak up publicly on social issues, uh, uh, and also in a very sensitive issue, right, as it pertains to hate crimes and violence. So it was a lot of learning, but thankfully we were able to get connected to Asian American scholars and nonprofit leaders and activists who
Mhm.
was able to inform us. And I think a lot of what is out there, you can also learn now on podcasts, on the PBS Asian American documentary. I think a big part of it is knowing our history and then having the courage to speak up.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think I agree with what you said. I feel like a lot of like I guess like Asians are pressured into choosing career paths that are more suitable, more stable. And I feel like I don't know, this was something that I was interested in asking you because I feel like computer science is like a relatively like popular choice and also a very stable job, and just like switching to the path of advocacy and social justice I feel like is less known. So I think it's really interesting to see like your journey and stuff. So I know you started, I guess, like kind of your journey with the process of the open letter that eventually appeared in the Wall Street Journal. I guess like can you tell us that process of what it was like drafting that open letter and then seeing like the support behind it?
The process to launch our letter, it started with just a couple of my friends, Dave Liu, Wendy Wynn, and many other volunteers. We just got together on a Zoom call just to first discuss and share our feelings around what happened and process what happened. And then as the days went on and we saw the lack of public mainstream response, whether it's from corporations or from mainstream media on the anti-Asian violence, and recognizing what happened, we felt, hey, like we need to get folks together and tell our own story. And so this is where the letter came about. It was really a team effort. Many folks were involved in writing it. And then many people were involved in sending this letter around to influential Asian Americans. And I think in the beginning, people were hesitant, because you're putting your name on something and it's a charged issue. But I think as we reflected on what happened, and really this is not a political issue, being safe and free from violence and being heard, those are basic rights that we deserve as an American, as a human being. More people started getting on board, and once you have a couple of notable people like founder of Zoom and co-founder of Yahoo, I think more people were comfortable getting on board. And when we finished the letter and launched it, we ended up having even the former president George W. Bush sign it. We had NBA stars and Andre Iguodala, J.J. Abrams. So many just people from across the community signed up to support. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, what was kind of your reaction seeing like all of the support and signatures?
It was very meaningful to see Asian Americans, really high profile people, put their reputations on the line to speak up and sign this letter.
Hmm.
Uh, it was a historic moment to have so many Asian Americans. We had over 1,000 when we launched. Now it's over 8,000 Asian
Hmm.
Americans and allies coming together in facing another historic moment in the pandemic and in the historic rise in anti-Asian violence. So it made me proud to be Asian American. It helped me define what it means to be Asian American. And I think for a lot of us, um, being Asian American was an experience of exclusion. It was an experience of being this perpetual foreigner. Doesn't matter if you were born here or your family's been here for multiple generations. But when we spoke up publicly, that's using a core right as an American, the right to free speech. And as we continue to organize in protesting and in voting, those are the rights that were fought and won to be an American. So really, it helped me understand what it means to be Asian American.
Yeah, definitely. I think that sentiment about like using core rights as Americans is was like really powerful. And I guess moving on to like standing with Asian Americans, I guess how is standing with Asian Americans working to end discrimination and racism? Like what are some of the events or things that standing with Asian Americans does?
Uh, a big part of it is to call out and bring to media attention the instances of discrimination, to show that it continues and it exists, whether it's on the streets or in the workplace. It's not very easy to tell our stories in the media. It's oftentimes ignored. And so really working with survivors and working with the media to help these stories move forward. And sometimes it takes organizing a protest to make it
Mhm.
newsworthy,
Mhm.
right? We sometimes actually have to yell for our voices to be heard. So organizing on the streets, organizing through the media, and we are starting to host general meetings to uh, create a safe space for Asian Americans to come together to
Mhm.
get to know our issues, get to
Mhm.
know local leaders, and really feel like we are our community.
Mhm.
And a community is really a place where you feel there's care for each other. And really, I think for a lot of us, there isn't a community that we're part of, even though we might be in places where there are a lot of Asian Americans, we're not really part of a community. So we've been working on building that in San Francisco and in New York City, where we have two chapters. And then the community is then able to hear each other's issues and take action, organize, put resources into issues in your neighborhood. And so that is really how we are operating as Stand with Asian Americans. We are catalysts for these local communities to create an Asian American community. And then we help empower them to take action so that your family is safe, you're facing fair treatment in schools, in the
Mhm.
workplace, in the public.
Yeah, I think that part about building community is very important. And I once heard someone say that like it's important to be in solidarity, not just like in solidarity as a noun, but also making sure that solidarity is seen as a verb, like actively making sure that everyone is in solidarity and like being together because yeah, obviously that famous phrase like united we stand, divided we fall. And I think if we do want to make great change, I guess it's important to be a community and stand up together, not just like have individual people, I guess, like kind of fighting. And I guess my next question is like kind of, I guess, like pivoting away from standing with Asian Americans. I guess like why do you think that important parts of Asian American history and culture aren't taught in schools?
The American school system have a certain view and privatization of what is seen as American history, and and oftentimes that does not include Asian American history, does not include African American history, Native American, Latino American, really a lot of the minorities and world history. Uh, there's been a movement now to get Asian American history taught in K through 12 schools. Um, and that movement started during the civil rights movement in the 60s, where the first Asian American studies departments were created
Hmm.
at like SF State and Berkeley and these schools. And so now it's really great to see that curriculum um, expanded to our early education. And it's a lot, it's very political. You're seeing states like Florida, um, you know, there's changing curriculum, right? You're seeing states like California that's actually making good strides in Asian American history. So I think there's sensitivity to teach. I think in some ways the darker history of Asian Americans, especially when you bring in minorities, that typically there's a lot of suffering that happens. Uh, and but I think really to know our history and not to repeat it, we have to learn it. So it's important.
Hmm. Yeah, I like the first part you said about what was it? It was like, oh yeah, people have like different views of what constitutes American history. And I know part of it is like I feel like Asians are seen as someone I think you mentioned this before, like Asians are seen as like perpetual foreigners. And I think maybe because of that, Asian American history isn't like covered as much because it doesn't it's not really seen as American history since they're seen as foreigners instead. And I know I had like personal experience with that because in like College Board, like World History AP, there were only like very few instances of, I guess, like Asian American history, like only the Chinese Exclusion Act and I guess like Japanese like internment camps, like those are one of the only two parts of history mentioned. And I think that was very like, I not like eye opening, but like distraught, like it made me very like distraught over what constitutes as like the curriculum. So I guess my next question would be like, how can we shed light on parts of Asian American history that school and media ignore?
If your school doesn't really have Asian American history, as students, you can advocate for it with your school board. You can work with your parents. Um, there are programs out there that already have the curriculum, or obviously already exists. So it does take some kind of activism, but I think it's actually really um, a good way to get involved in um, civics and civil rights. So teaching Asian American history should not be controversial. That's American history. And I think if you have just a couple, it could just be, even one person at the school take that initiative, right? You can get your classmates to sign a petition. You can reach out to a local journalist, local legislator, and get get this passed. A similar movement is to get Lunar New Year recognized in schools and in states. So California this year, 2023, became the first state to recognize Lunar New Year. And many other cities and school districts have adopted Lunar New Year. So that's another, really shouldn't be controversial policy to pass, because Lunar New Year for many folks of Asian descent is one of the main holidays in our culture.
Yeah, definitely. I know my school personally, we've been implementing like assemblies and stuff. So there's like assembly for Lunar New Year, and also there's also like Culture Fest, and there's also like more like there was also something I think for the Autumn Moon Festival. So I know like schools are like, at least my school is like slowly starting to implement these things that celebrate Asian culture and heritage. And yeah, so my next question is, I guess, like, do you feel like hate against Asian Americans had been largely overlooked until the pandemic?
I think so. I think the country likes to make issues more or less like black or white, and Asians are excluded from consideration. And I think we are seen as this model minority where we're essentially like white people and we don't face issues. A lot of like hospitals, universities, even cities will group Asians with white as a category in their reporting of diversity and inclusion. But we are not like a white person. We do face discrimination. Clearly, we saw with the historic rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. And we also face state level discrimination with the China initiative that targeted Asian American professors, and on no basis targeting them just because they are of Chinese descent. And I think this pandemic was an awakening for many Asian Americans to realize that we have to speak up and fight for our civil rights, because you know uh, um, they're not guaranteed. We have to really be part of the political process to make sure that they work for us. Um, so I think this is really a political awakening. The term Asian American was formed in 1968 during the civil rights movement. as a lot of Asian Americans were in the marches and in the movement, at that time they were seen as Orientals, and it didn't really feel empowering, right? Because that was a term, sort of derogatory term that was kind of given by outsiders. And so a couple students gathered at UC Berkeley, and in this meeting, they decided, hey, we're going to be known as Asian Americans, and that came out, right? So that was a time of civil rights and fighting, oppression and imperialism, and the term Asian American wasn't used really as a national level until perhaps Vincent Chin in 1982. And then now, 40 years later, it's brought up again. And hopefully this time, and I know, and I feel this will be the case, that the Asian American movement really will sustain itself, because what's happened in the past, you will see spikes of activity, and then the activists, the groups, they kind of burn out, or the interest, the funding fades, and then you don't have any infrastructure for a couple of decades until another major issue happens, right? I think this time, there's enough of us, and there's just continued violence and discrimination, that we realize, hey, we need to build these stable institutions, and that's what Stand with Asian Americans is building to be, is a long-term institution to protect Asian Americans from violence and from discrimination.
Yeah, I feel like we shouldn't wait for like a major incident or like a major hate crime to galvanize activism. I think it should be something that continues and something that sustains, as you said. And yeah, I personally do agree with your statement on how like I feel like the pandemic has was like sort of an awakening, because I know for me personally, like even though I did read about stories about Asian hate and discrimination, and I did face like microaggressions, I feel like it wasn't until the pandemic that I really started to notice, that I really started to pay attention, that maybe, I don't know, like that there was not like there was discrimination, but like it just like became more under my attention. And so I know you talked a little bit about the model minority myth. So I guess like how do you think that idea of Asian Americans being the model minority has kind of played into the treatment of Asian Americans or the overlooking of Asian hate?
Yeah, Asian Americans, a lot of us the majority of Asian Americans who are here today came post 1965, and were selected for our skills. Uh, One sec, let me repeat that. There's a little background noise. So most Asian Americans here today are immigrants that came post 1965 as the immigration laws changed, and we were selected for our ability to work in needed fields in America. And during that time, this term model minority was created to show that, hey, look, these Asian Americans, like, they're hardworking, they're subservient, they don't cause issues, you should be like them, basically telling other minorities like African Americans, Latino Americans, right? It was really used a way to, pit us against the other groups, and further um, uh, indoctrinate our community to be kind of a heads down worker. Um, And I think a lot of us were trained to believe that, hey, we'll just do hard work and everything will work out. I think from our home countries, there is a long tradition, typically, of meritocracy, right, education, and so that makes sense to us. There isn't a history typically of democracy in our home countries. Democracy is a foreign concept outside of Western Europe, and so for most Asian Americans, it's really a new practice. And how do we, you know, be part of a democracy? And so when we don't speak up, when we don't vote, or we don't file lawsuits when we're discriminated, it's like if we didn't have the rights in the first place. It's like if we were just in Asia. And so that feeds into the model minority, that we don't cause problems. And when we have the mentality, it makes us an easy target to pick on, right? Whether it's in school or in the workplace, because the bullies will know that, hey, there's little consequences. But if you're getting physically attacked, if you're getting discriminated, like you have to fight back. And that's the only way. Otherwise, the bat, the, the beatings will continue, and it creates more trauma for the community to see that, hey, like not only can we get picked on, there are no consequences, or when we do fight back, we feel like we're not being heard, and that's often the case. So really, to overcome the model minority, we really have to leverage the rights we have as an American, the civil rights that we have, and be part of that fight. So I really think that as Asian Americans, we need to break out of this mentality of a worker to become a warrior. And all of us have the potential to be a warrior, and a warrior for our family, for our people, for our country. Too many of us just think of ourselves as a worker, and we'll just, follow the paths that's laid out for us, by society, right? And we realize that as now you're seeing millennial generation who many were born here, or they're came when they were young, they don't have any accents, they went to top schools, they're hitting the ceilings in their workplace, right? They're topping out at middle management and getting a fraction of what they deserve, having to work twice as hard as anybody else. And what that's saying, if we accept it, is that our time is worth less than someone else's time, and our life is worth less than someone else's life. But it's not. Our life is worth just as much as anybody else. So by accepting the model minority stereotype, by accepting less resources for our time and efforts, we are essentially accepting that our life is worth less, and it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something else that I thought you said was interesting. So I know you touched on like the like head down worker kind of thing, and I feel like a lot of people think that if you're quiet or if you don't say anything, then you must be okay. Like, but I feel like that doesn't really like equal each other, and I feel like because people think that if you're quiet you must be okay, it allows people to excuse their own bad behavior, because then it's like, oh, if this person isn't saying anything, it means that I can continue treating them this way, or like they're okay with me treating them this way. And I think there's just a lot of like problems, issues with the model minority myth, because it does allow people to treat you as less than what you are worth. And I think what you said is really true.
Yeah, for young people, for young Asian Americans, uh, between 15 and 24, the number one cause of death is suicide. No other group has that as a number one cause. Asian Americans are the least likely of any group to seek mental health support. So oftentimes when we suffer in silence. We internalize it. There is a saying in Chinese that you eat the bitterness, and that's very unhealthy, but it's seen as like a positive value, right? You just kind of suppress it, and maybe you unleash it and you take it out in other ways, right? But I think that's as an Asian American, like, is this society that the Western societies do encourage more mental health discussions, and addressing how we feel, right? Whereas I think emotion and feelings are perhaps more suppressed. And to really be a full human being, we have to be able to express a range of emotions and be okay with expressing it versus being criticized. Hey, why were you annoyed, or why did you cry? Those are normal human emotions, right? Another hallmark of this model minority stereotype is like we are meant to be perfect. You can't get a minus. You can't make mistakes. That's not a human being. We all make mistakes, and to live like that, to help be held to these really uh uh almost unobtainable standards is really a suffocating life. If you have to go through your whole life having to be perfect and not be able to like take it easy, or get a B, or or even fail a class, whatever it is, right? Or not do well in something. That's just part of life. If you can't make failures, if you can't speak your mind, and you know, uh, it's really more of an oppressive environment that it's like that, right? Like, hey, oh,
Mhm.
if you make a mistake, you say something wrong, or you don't, then you're going to be cast out. You're going to be, you're going to not be able to survive. Like that's a very abusive place to live, right? So I think we got to break out of that, right? And know that, hey, no, we have a right to speak up, and that's actually one of the core rights as an American that we don't have in many countries around the world, and that is really a core a right and privilege that we do have here.
Mhm. Yeah, so you said that Asian Americans, they are the least likely group to seek mental help. I feel like that isn't because Asian Americans suffer less. It's, as you said, like they're just less willing to, I guess, like find or ask for help. And yeah, that was just like kind of my take on it. And I guess to like end this interview, what are some things that individuals can do to help fight Asian American discrimination?
And just to touch on the mental health aspect, uh, there are a couple factors why Asians don't seek out mental health. One, there's a lot of stigma around mental health, and being seen as, hey, if you're seeing a therapist, there's something wrong with you, versus that we all have issues that we need to discuss. The other factor is that there are relatively few Asian American therapists. So someone who is not Asian American may not understand what you're going through. Right? They may not be able to relate with you as a therapist, and that's another issue. And culturally speaking, too, like there may be other paths that therapy will be more um, uh, accessible than like maybe a typical like talk therapy that's more Western. So I think this is really where like maybe even at a high school level, like finding support groups so you can just come together and talk about issues. Like that's therapeutic, right? And maybe there's a facilitator you can find, right, who is Asian American, who has kind of the understanding, can create the safe space. I think those are good models, versus it's also very expensive. Third factor, right? To go spend an hour or spend hundreds of bucks to talk to somebody, that's a luxury that most of us don't, can't afford, right? So I think those are, really important issues to solve for community groups, for school groups, clubs, is like, hey, how do we address the mental health aspect? How do we feel safe? How do we feel heard? Oftentimes that's not going to an expensive therapist, and talking to them for an hour.
Mhm. Mhm. So going back to, yeah, obviously, like I agree with you said, and going back to my original question, I guess like what are some things that individuals can do to help fight Asian American discrimination?
At a basic level, to fight discrimination comes from within, training yourself to be able to respond to, be aware of discrimination, whether it's physical, whether it's microaggression, whether it's more systemic. Uh, there are things you can do, whether it's, training in martial arts, whether it's training in history, in debate, um, you know, and being comfortable in your own space, and creating this sense of being indomitable, even though there might be not be a lot of Asian Americans where you live. Uh, I'm in San Francisco there, so there are a ton of us, but you might be somewhere else, but you can always create the sense of you're indomitable, right? Uh, and that spirit alone will give off a sense of, hey, like this person is not going to just be easily pushed
Mhm.
around. Um, the second thing is to connect with other Asian Americans, and come together. I think you would be surprised how many are looking for others
Mhm.
to connect with. Right. I think none of us want to be alone. And um, and growing up, I didn't have spaces to talk about these issues. And it's only really the past couple of years really started reflecting on what it means to be Asian American and talking about our issues. So I think finding the others and coming together, uh, and then building that community being a group of people that cares for each other. Right. I think when we left our home countries, we lost our community. Right. Our community where we've been for thousands of years, where we have all this family and heritage and culture. Um, so many of us are here just with, our parents and maybe small extended family. So, it can feel very lonely. It can feel very uh, isolating. But there is a broader Asian American community, right? And find the others, come together, and really build a community.
Yeah, I guess like to any Asian Americans who feel alone, like the Asian American population in the US is like 6%, which I feel like is like a good amount. It's like a decent number. So even if you, I guess like to anyone watching maybe, like if you're an Asian American and you feel alone, like there are other people who like you're not the only one that feels this way. Like there are other Asians that are also, I guess, like looking for their greater community. And so, yeah, I feel like we had a very interesting conversation today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Zhu. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me. And thank you so much to everyone at home watching. And I will see everyone next time. Bye.
Thank